Ah, yeah, just about as groovy as a 10-cent movie. I'm your man, Calvin Gibbs. Welcome to Drama Talk Radio. As you know, Drama Talk Radio is the show where the word drama, D-R-A-M-A, stands for developing real and moving art. We're so happy that you chose to listen in on this episode of Drama Talk Radio. I have a very special guest here with me today. And I say very special because this is a person that 2 weeks ago I didn't know. But I feel that I have learned a lot about her. I have enjoyed one of her latest projects. Please welcome to Drama Talk Radio, Rebekah Lynn Pierce.
Hello, good evening, afternoon, morning, wherever you're listening from. Hello.
Hello. Thank you for being my guest today. And we're going to get right to it. Rebekah is an accomplished writer. She's done I'm looking at her resume, which runs a couple pages, a lot of writings. Most importantly, I want to talk about a project that just had a stage reading on this past Friday, and it's called That Colorblind Kind of Love. And in this story, there's a couple, and they find each other in 3 different time eras. And the most important thing of this story is one character is African American or Black, the other character is white. So when you think about the the 19th century and 20th century, to be in love and be open with it was forbidden, frowned upon, taboo, etc., etc. So Rebekah, tell me, how did you come up with the idea for this story?
Well, I have 2 influences. Well, first of all, my background is I'm an English literature and composition instructor. So I have read a multitude and taught a multitude of works across, American-led, African-American-led, women's-led humanities. So I'm from the West Coast. I'm from California, and I'm here in Virginia by way of the military. I was in the Air Force, so I was stationed out here. When I returned back here in 1999 to live, began to learn more and more about Virginia's history. And in 2009, I ran across a story in the news on the internet about a judge in Alabama who was refusing to marry an interracial couple because he said that that the children would be damaged. And I was appalled by that, but not surprised because I had, again, been teaching for a long time at that point. And one of my favorite stories is Kindred by Octavia Butler. And it's a science fiction story of a woman who is pulled back into time to save an ancestor, and it turns out to be the white plantation owner of the plantation her people were slaves on. And so I then found out about the story of Richard and Mildred Loving, and I was just intrigued about this idea that a couple could be put in jail for doing something as natural as falling in love. And so reading that case in Alabama, and then reading another case I believe happened in Louisiana, and then learning about Richard and Mildred Loving's fight to love one another, I decided, well, this would make an interesting story. This is an interesting look at how, being the daughter of a man of a grandfather who was able to pass at the turn of the 20th century. My grandfather was passed for white, and he did that whenever it was advantageous to him to be able to purchase property or land. And my grandmother was a dark-skinned Native American African. And I grew up looking at that tension between these two people trying to navigate a world that didn't really accept either one. And so I wanted to kind of tell that story. I wanted to look at how does race, this socially constructed ideology that has set up this world to be so divisive, what role does it play or does it play a role at all in people's decision as to whether or not they want to move forward with love? And at this time, Obama had been elected, and the tension about electing a Black man to the presidency, I found it intriguing to blend history with a little bit of fantasy science fiction with our current state of affairs. So the story was kind of born out of all of those components. I wanted to take a look at what is love. Can it travel across time? Is that really something that's possible? But even if it's not, how do you find love in the middle of a world, in the middle of a world, an environment, a period in history where they're telling you that what's going on between you and your beloved is wrong? And then they'll put you in jail for that, because if you know the story of Richard and Mildred Loving, they were arrested for marrying. They married in DC, but came back to Virginia where they're from, and they were arrested and actually were charged with violating the Racial Integrity Act of 1924. So they were both charged as felons and ordered to leave the state of Virginia should they want to stay married. And I just found that fascinating and appalling. So I wanted to write about it, and that's what writers do. We write about what's going on in our world.
Well, as a person that does interviews, I also did some research on the the Integrity Act of 1924, because I had never heard of it.
Oh, yes.
And unbelievable.
It's just ridiculous. Ridiculous.
The interbreeding of people from different racial backgrounds was outlawed.
Yes.
Basically, it was outlawed. I mean, they could not breed, and crazy. Let's go back to the story.
Well, we know why it was done. Yeah, we know why it was done, to separate. And that's the whole point. That's what I'm looking at in this play about race and the creation purposefully of division.
Back in 1855, on that plantation where Twyla and Samson was in love, and their love was taboo and forbidden. Would you say that was more dangerous, more or more common?
Absolutely. I mean, I would. There's a little bit of delay here, so pardon me if it sounds like I'm jumping in. I apologize for that. I was influenced by the story of Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings. And so we open up with Twyla on the auction block, because that idea of watching the person that you love be sold, and she's pregnant in that scene.
Right. And
so we know that the law says the status of the child is the status of the mother. So regardless of what Samson wanted to do, he would have been the owner of that child, since he's the owner, the co-owner of the plantation. But it was extremely forbidden. And, I have another book that I wrote a couple years ago called Murder on 2nd Street, the Jackson Ward Murders. And in my research for that book, it's set in the 1920s here in Jackson Ward, one of the Black Wall Streets. And in that book, I tell the story of an interracial couple that were caught. And the law, Virginia, what Richmond did to interracial couples that were caught is they would throw them in the James River. And in the scene in my book, this couple is caught, and they're both tossed into the James River. And the gentleman survives because he can swim, but the woman who's colored, who's actually mulatto, though she's mixed, she drowns. And a lot of people, when they read that book, they're like, did that really happen? I'm like, yeah, that's what they did. So you risked everything for love. If you came out publicly, you had to keep it a secret. And I often teach my students, when we talk about Thomas Jefferson, I kind of position him in this very difficult limbo state where Jefferson had to decide whether he was going to go with love or his legacy and his reputation. And we know that, this is the age of enlightenment. It's all about the public image versus the private. And so if you know anything about Jefferson, you know that he never responded publicly to all the illicit stories that came out about his relationship with Sally. And he did not do that on purpose, because he just didn't, he's old school. He didn't believe in talking about those things. But we can imagine that, he really literally had to choose between his legacy, and even if he did love her, I don't know, but I'm just looking at the fact that he would manumit his children from her upon his death, and that she went with him all over the world, not his wife necessarily, but Sally. And so I just, it is a risk. We will never know the true story, the whole story. But when we look at interracial couples during this time period, the way that I teach it is that they would not have created a law called the Racial Integrity Act of 1924 if people were not marrying, if people were not falling in love. You would not have these laws that forbade interbreeding or interracial relationships, or the castration of a Black man if he's caught having any relations with a white woman, whether it was consensual or not, even though they always tried to posit it as a rape. But if they have these laws that make those things punishment, castration, and removal from the state, why are they doing that? Because people are falling in love.
That's right. And the theme that I found in each era that the couple were in is that love trumps all. Why would you go through that type of situation, put yourself, your offspring in that type of situation if love did not trump all?
Right, that's a complicated question, and I there's like so much history behind that, so many social beliefs or cultural beliefs and practices, and you have to just really, the risk is great. It's great. So it must be love. It has to be love, because why would you risk your well-being and your livelihood if it wasn't love? And so this is my question, how powerful is love? Can it trump, pardon the pun, but can it trump hatred, divisiveness, racism? Can it trump that? And so if you still have interracial couples who get stared at awkwardly when they're walking down the street, or you still have multiracial children for whom probably a week doesn't go by that someone asks them, what are you? I mean, this makes me question, like, where are we with humanity, that people would have to validate or explain or justify or defend that which is natural and innate. So, like, you don't come out the womb going, I'm only going to marry a fellow Negro. I'm only going to marry a fellow white person. You don't come out with an already preconceived notion about what race is. It is a learned, taught behavior. But we do come into this world with love, and we are here to experience love, whether it's romantic or platonic. Love is love, and you should be able to experience that and be open to it in all of its images or all of its forms that it comes to you in. But this thing called race has denied us even access to the thing which brought us here. We can't even access that fully because of this thing called race and racism.
I agree that racism and hatred is not something that you're born with. As a Black man growing up with my older uncles, all the men in my family were from North Carolina. And as a little boy, listening to their conversations about white people, white women in particular, white women was okay as a side piece.
Right.
But you did not want to marry one.
No.
And for decades after that in my family, there were no intermingling between the races until, I would say, the last 18 years. Younger cousins have started their falling in love with people from another race. And there was always discussion among the older elders in the family about, was this right? Was this wrong? How could he or she do this type of thing? And eventually, it's to the point, my third cousin just got married last month to a white woman, and I didn't hear anything said from any of the relatives. I mean, of course, we are not able to reach out like we used to and be among each other, but there's still ways that they could
Right.
have
But you know what they were
communicated
thinking.
with me. But it seems to be more accepted 40 years later now than it was back in 1960s.
I mean, it seems to be on the surface, but there's still so much covert side-eyeing of interracial mixed couples.
Oh, yeah.
But I find it fascinating that they, this generation is, I don't want to say braver, but they're more willing to risk because they feel that we have come much further. But when you still have judges in these small hick towns in the middle of these little country communities that are still refusing to marry folks who are of different skin color, it's still very troubling. And this idea, and I even have the character Sheba, who is Twyla's mother. She voices what your relatives said maybe 40 years ago. Still think it, but just don't say it publicly. And I have her voice it because we still think like that. We still believe it's not safe to love publicly, to go that far. They can't be more than a side piece, like what you just said. But then I also have Samson's mother voice the same thing. It's important for us to see that each side is thinking that. Each side foolishly believes that. And this is where we need to begin to change the narrative. But the question is, are these young couples, these interracial couples, are they willing to be involved in sitting down and having that conversation? Because Sheba asked Twyla some very legitimate questions. Society is not going to accept it. And you can't live in your art. You're going to have to answer the question, what are they?
Let me ask you. No. Please go ahead. I cut you off. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. Because I was going to say, because legally, still with our census and whatnot, they still ask you what you are. And even when you're born still in the United States of America, if you are born with a Negro, quote unquote, Negro parent, you are still identified on your birth certificate as colored. So it's far more complicated and entrenched in our society, this identification by color, than we would like to believe. So as much as we do want to say, oh, kumbaya, let's all love one another, it's so deeply institutionalized. And that's the thing I want to, I'm hoping this piece does, is get people to see just how deeply entrenched this socially constructed ideology that was used to purposely divide and keep one group in power and another group excluded. How we have now, it's so deeply entrenched in our existence and even our everyday existence, that love is up against. It's up against, and it's like, how do you allow it to win? Does it begin with an individual, or does it begin with a community? That's the question we're looking at. One of many questions we're looking at, I should say.
Well, a question for you. If you think back on how life was for Blacks in 1855 and the life in 1935 compared to the life in 2020, if we had to live the life of the Black people in 1855, for example, do you think there would be more or less chances to love? Because wait a minute, because you mentioned about the young people seem to be more tolerant of interracial, and I do agree. But is it because their lives are not the same as it was in the 1800s?
Well, here's the deal about the 1800s. We do not know, because they could not be public. Again, because of this ideology, this belief about public versus private life. We do not know how many interracial couples there were. In fact, this is particularly for Virginia. This is what's so insidious about Virginia. In Virginia, if you became a freed slave, the law said you had 1 year to get out of the state of Virginia. And so what many Black families did, Black people did, those who became free, they bought their relatives. And so on paper, they were identified as slaves or property of that colored person. And they did that to keep families intact. So we cannot legitimately prove or say that there were not more or less interracial couples than there are today. Because, and I'll give you another example, my great-grandfather. My grandfather was mixed, and I found out through the census. And if you look at the picture of my grandfather, first of all, my grandfather was white with green eyes. His siblings were all the same. They all looked the same. And what I found through a census, the early 1920 census really, was that my great-grandfather, his father, was identified on a census as white, but living with 3 colored women who were identified as his daughters.
Mm. Wow.
Now that makes me wonder, like, what was an old white man doing living with 3 women classified as their daughters? And I can't even believe you even put it on the
wow.
census, right? So we, because people, and we know that the census, would come in the late 1800s. We don't know what the full story is because, records have been burned, records have been lost. If you were poor, you didn't keep records because chances are 9 times out of 10 you were illiterate. Because we know that on small plantations, for example, if a white person owned a small farm and had maybe 2 or 3 slaves, there was no records kept of those slaves because nobody was pretty much literate and you didn't have a need to keep records. But if you owned 1,000+ slaves on a very large plantation, records were kept because that was commerce, that was commodity, and you needed to keep track of money because your slaves were property. You need to keep track of money coming in and out. So I can't really answer that question for that period because we just don't know. We know that we have the rise, I hate to say the rise, but the emergence of the mulatto or the mixed population. Not all of it, we can argue, comes from slavery, from breeding of slaves, because at some point, again, I go back to the laws. Why were the laws being created? They weren't being created just because. There is always an intention to a creation of a law. And if we look at the South, why were those laws being put forth? Because clearly these types of relationships must have been happening. Why would you have a law that if a Black man is caught with a white woman, he is castrated or run out of town? Why do you have those laws? Why was it necessary to create the Racial Integrity Act of 1924? I mean, you have to question that. And so that would make me think that this is going on more than what they want us to know. Things are kept out of history for a reason. Because if you see that people were going with what is natural, what is innate, if you see that, then the argument that these people of color cannot be human beings and don't deserve justice or to be treated right goes out the window.
Mm-hmm. That is
it goes
correct.
Completely out the window. But if you want to keep your power and you want to keep the division going because it's lucrative for you financially, it's lucrative for you socially, it's lucrative for you politically, and it's lucrative for you economically, then you have to keep spinning the narrative and you have to put laws in place to shut it down. You have to do that. So we can say that we're more advanced in the 21st century, but I don't think we are as advanced as we'd like to be, because why does a play like this exist? Why do we still have Black Lives Matter? Why are we still having this conversation? Why are young people still being asked to define who and what they are? Why do you still have officers who think they can just take your life with impunity and not be convicted for it? It's murder. Why? Why do we still teach Frederick Douglass? Why do we still teach? Why? Because these things are not gone. And to pretend that everything is easier and hunky-dory is the reason why we're still in this mess, why we have such social upheaval. Because the truth of the matter is we are still in the problem.
That is correct. That is so correct. I am encouraged when I see people out protesting and I see the mix of everyone out there. I'm encouraged that we are getting the support. We being Black people are getting the support and the encouragement from those that are not Black, that maybe some eyes are starting to open and realize the treatment that has been going on for these hundreds of years, and will stay with us to move things in the right direction. I'm very much encouraged when I see that. I know that there were white people out there.
What I have to say to that, and what I, again, what I teach my students, what I teach my students is that we would not be here if there were people who said this is wrong. So it's not new for white people or any other people to be on the front lines with us, right? And this is why I have Samson, in Act 2, really give some serious heart to how it feels to know that you're privileged and to feel like you can't necessarily do anything about it, or when you try to, people think you have ulterior motives. Why can't it be that he just sees that it's wrong and wants to do something about it? And so, the difference I always argue between the civil rights movement and today is the civil rights movement, we wouldn't be here if it had not been televised. If white folks had not seen for their own eyes on television what was happening. I mean, there were many who knew it was wrong, because you couldn't have had the abolitionist movement do what it did without white folks who were reading the newspapers going, oh my God, this is an atrocity. And then reading slave narratives like Frederick Douglass and Olaudah Equiano, reading those narratives and going, oh my God, because the newspapers of the 19th century was the television of the 20th century. And what that means is that the internet of the 21st century is the new push. So each century had its medium that allowed for white people to see privilege and see that this is wrong. For people in general to go, wait a minute, something's not right here. Because not every Black person was a slave. We have to be clear about that. There were many who were born free, and many who were activists and risked their lives to do that which was right. But then there were many who participated in slavery. There were many who participated in keeping their own people down, because then we get into classism, right? So when we look at the civil rights movement, it was a televised movement. People had to be stirred. And when we look at social media now in the 21st century, it's a social media movement, because young people are all about this technology. And now this technology, like television, is being used to put on the front lines the social injustices that are still occurring even into the 21st century.
Absolutely. I do want to add,
and that's a commonality that we have.
I do want to add that I've seen several productions in this virtual environment, readings. I've actually seen some play productions, and I must admit, I was so intrigued by the quality of your actors on Friday night.
Thank you.
They brought the characters to life. I don't know if these are the actors that actually performed it on stage, but they brought the realness to it. There was a connection that has been missing in this virtual world, for me at least. I felt the connection. I wanted to find out, I cared about the characters. I wanted to find out.
Excellent.
I wanted to find out more about them. So I want you, whenever you can, give them kudos. I thought they did an excellent job. And I'm very critical of what I've been seeing in this virtual environment. But that I told I signed off at a certain point, and I ran and told my wife, that was good. That was excellent. That's the way it should be.
Right. I have to give a lot of that to our director, Shania, because she's been with me on this script. I mean, like I said, this script has had 4 revisions because it's been performed at 4 different pivotal times in the last 10 years in American history. So Shania, this is her 3rd time, I believe, directing this play. And so some of the actors have been with us. 2 of the gentlemen have been with us before. And the other ones were people that, the director picked, that she has worked with in the past, that she felt like could really, they're professionals. This is not an easy script. Let me say that. It is especially not an easy script for white actors, because I am asking you to use language that is offensive to many, many people. But any actor who's worth their salt and understands that this is historical context, that to change the wording changes the intention of the piece, they know not to do that. You're not that character. You are portraying that character. You're taking a piece of it to make them come true. And so Shania and Taylor, our director, she knew these actors, where to get them from. And then, when we gave them the script, our feedback to them was, go in. You must go in. This is not a play where you can hold back. Not at all. And then, we've had some people had to bow out at the last minute. We had to make some quick emergency changes like you do with any show. But I'm so grateful to these actors for committing to it, because, when they first got that script, I think everybody's mouth about fell to the ground. It's like, but it's meaty, as one actress said. She said, this is meat. And this is what every actor looks for. They look for the meat. So you don't walk away from this play unscathed as both an actor, a director, a producer, and an audience member. You just can't. And so I'm grateful to them.
Oh, yeah. As a person, yes. After going through the experience, no matter what their participation was, actor, director, audience member, I think you will be changed. Or at least you'll have something heavy to think about. And I really enjoyed it. If you ever come to the Midwest, or you ever put it on stage again, if we ever get out of this virtual environment, please let me know, because Mr. Gibbs wants to see it live. Yes.
Well, Mr. Gibbs needs to put me in touch with some folks, because we would love to bring it to some other places. In fact, I did get a call today talking about hopefully bring it to Lynchburg, Virginia. And we've had people curious about it. I think the thing about virtual theater is that it's opening up a new door, and it is an absolute challenge, but this is why the script has got to be, you've got to have a good script. You've got to have actors who can bring that script to life, and directors who can help the actors bring the script to life. But this show performed live is uncomfortable, even more uncomfortable. But it does what it's supposed to do. So we're looking for opportunities to not only, if we have to do it virtually again, which we are, by the way, going to do this again, because the feedback was just huge. And so we're going to do it again virtually. But we would love to consider looking at 21 and seeing, how, when theaters open back up, if this is a piece that someone would like to mount. I've done it independently. I did it 4 years ago independently. It's a costume designer's dream, a set designer's dream, but a producer's nightmare. It's a challenge, but it's a great piece, and it's an educational piece that I hope my dream for the piece is for it to be taught, for it to be used to have this conversation. And we're going to do it again in October, late October, because we want to use it as a vehicle to help push the vote. We want people to see this piece, join us on this journey, and then go out and vote. Everything is at stake. And this play shows you that.
Well, I will be looking for that date. You can also send it to me, and I will do what I can to let my people know, my social group know about it. And when the time is right, I do know some people that know some people that know some people. So bringing it to Chicago area is something that can be worked on. I think
I would love that. I would absolutely love that. I mean, that would be phenomenal. That would be phenomenal. That would be phenomenal. Because like I said, this is a piece, honey. This is a journey right here.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. So I want to ask at this point, if there's any links, if anyone wants to contact you, where can they contact you at? Any websites?
Well, they can contact me, of course, through my company, RLP Productions, with an S.com. That's my initials, Rebekah Lynn Pierce. But I'm if you Google my name, Rebekah with a K-A-H, I'm out there because, I've been doing this for a while. I'm a novelist as well as a screenwriter, as well as a playwright, and a speaker. So if they Google me, Rebekah, they can find me, or they can, again, go to rlpproductions.com. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I'm on all that, LinkedIn. And then they can, of course, email me directly at, my name is spelled with a K-A-H, so make sure you Google Rebekah with a K-A-H. But they can send an email to Rebekah@rlpproductions.com. But like I said, just Google me. I'm out there.
You're everywhere. You're doing it.
I'm trying.
And Rebekah, you are definitely developing real and moving art. So thank you very much for being my guest today. This episode of Drama Talk Radio, I've enjoyed it so much. And as I said, when your next stage reading is going to be, a virtual reading, please let me know. I know 20 people off the bat that would be willing to sign in based on my recommendation.
Oh, wow, wonderful.
So yeah, we can break the internet, if you will, but I definitely want to help you promote this because I think it's a piece that is definitely worthy of it. It's important for our time, and it's a story that needs to be told and heard. So again, thank you so much for being on Drama Talk Radio.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Your next project, please come back, let us know about it. We'll definitely be looking forward to it. Well, that's about all, y'all, for this episode of Drama Talk Radio. I'm your host, Calvin Gibbs, and it's always imparting that we take 2 steps to the rear and get on out of here. Until next time, exit stage left.